Hey everybody, welcome to another Star Trek video, and because I didn't take the time to actually write down what I'm about to say beforehand, it's yet another edition of Not Actually Trek Actually, which apparently you all really like. And every time I do one of these and I make a big deal about how, oh, I'm just going to half-ass it, I didn't script it, I'm not really going to try to make it good, you're like, oh, hey, we like these videos. In fact, we like these even better than some of the ones that you scripted, which, I mean, thank you, I appreciate it, but also it's, kind of negative reinforcement. You're saying I don't have to script the videos? I'm better if I just make shit up as I go along instead of taking the time to craft a thesis and have some kind of coherent argument and point to make. And no, just sit in front of the camera and just blather on about Star Trek for half an hour. That's just as good as the ones where you try. Anyway, I'm going to respond to some of your comments on previous videos. That's always fun. So these first few comments are from a video I did last month called Which Star Trek Character Actually Has the Most Wasted Potential? And this first comment from that video is from Michael Chiarcos, who says, Steve, what about Barclay? He was one of the only interesting characters on TNG. He was the only character in Starfleet that actually had problems and had to deal with them regularly. I agree with you about Barclay. He's a great character, and I did a video all about Barclay, and I love him. He's a fantastic character. Was he a character with wasted potential? I feel like that really depends on where you choose to draw that line, because personally, as a guest character, as a recurring character who appeared in 1 or 2 episodes a season, I thought Barclay was a really well-used character. I mean, you could make the argument that, well, he was such a good character that he should have been in more episodes, and okay, I mean, if that's how you feel, then that's an acceptable argument, and I don't disagree with that. But when I think of characters with wasted potential, Barclay's not the one that comes to mind, especially from TNG, because, yeah, he doesn't appear in that many episodes, but the episodes that he does appear in are either centered on him or feature him in a really prominent, important supporting role. And I think overall he's treated pretty well in TNG. And then, they bring him back for some Voyager episodes as well. So I don't know if I would say that Barclay was a wasted character. Would I like to have seen more of him? Sure, if they had more cool Barclay stories to tell, yeah, absolutely. But was he a wasted character? For me personally, I don't think so. But your mileage may vary. Next one is from My Magnificent Octopus. Pulaski wasn't beamed into space. She stepped into an empty turbolift shaft. And can I just say, this comment was representative of quite a few of you who left comments making a similar reference to Pulaski stepping into an empty elevator shaft. And I just want to say that I love you. All of you who made that reference, all of you who made that exact same reference, I'm so happy with the audience I have. You can't even know that there's so many people who watched that video made the exact same reference to another character played by Diana Muldaur, who made a very memorable exit from LA Law by by stepping into a fucking empty elevator shaft. And also, you immediately made me regret that I did not make that joke. So it's one of those awkward things where it's like, oh, I love you guys, what a great reference. And then I turn it on myself and I think, why didn't you think of that, dipshit? Why didn't you make that joke? Why are you letting the people watching the video write better jokes than you, huh? This is your job. This is your job. This is how you pay the bills. You need to do better. You need to do better. This next one is from Captain Andy. I was also very confused by Uhura having her memory erased. When she's being reschooled, she is speaking Swahili, so are we to believe she's had her memory erased except for early childhood? Even then, how the hell is she supposed to be educated enough to be a Starfleet officer within the incredibly short amount of time given? If they can educate people from child level to Starfleet officer level so quickly, we should see a lot of very young Starfleet officers. Yeah, it's one of those things that clearly they just didn't put that much thought into, because, at the time, this was Star Trek the original series, or as it was known back then, Star Trek. Nobody thought that people would still be watching this shit 50 years later. Nobody thought that there would be a half dozen spin-off series and over a dozen spin-off or sequel movies. No, they were just making this shit up as they went along. So somebody said, oh, they erased Uhura's memory, and does she get her memory back? No, let's not do that. Maybe they put her on the computer and she relearns everything. Yeah, sure, sounds great. Who cares? Next comment on this video is from Kavik Kang. 2 words, Captain Sulu. Next question. Yeah, I remember in the 90s when there were rumors, I don't know how close we ever really were to getting a Captain Sulu series, but there were rumors, perhaps started by George Takei, I don't know, in the 90s, that maybe Paramount was thinking about doing a Captain Sulu TV series. This was around the time when Star Trek was, there were 2 other shows on the air, DS9 and Voyager were on the air, I think. They had just done the Voyager episode where Captain Sulu makes an appearance, and there were people saying like, hey, maybe a Captain Sulu show would be fun. And I would have loved that because, as I believe I've stated before, TOS movie era Star Trek, at least aesthetically speaking, is my favorite Star Trek. Like, I love TOS movie era Star Trek. I love the uniforms, I love the bridge designs, I love the way the ships looked, I just love the whole thing. So a Captain Sulu show set in that era would have been just perfect for me. And it is sad that we never got it, because it would have been a great way to give us more development of Sulu as a character, which would have been awesome, and it just would have been a fun show and set during a really fun, cool era of Star Trek. But alas, we never got it. Chris Clark says, Nowhere Man! Best thing to come out of UPN, hands down. It was very nice to see so many people who also remember Nowhere Man very fondly when I referenced it in that video. But, Nowhere Man, best thing to come out of UPN? I believe you're forgetting a little show called The Secret Diary of Desmond Pfeiffer, my friend. You show a little respect. Now, the next few comments are from the video that I did the week after the video about Star Trek characters with wasted potential, about other characters that had wasted potential that I didn't mention in that video, overlooked characters that I overlooked. And this first comment from that video is from Wild Smiley. Charlie X was actually Yeoman Rand's first episode. A shame that her character had to deal with that bullshit in her first appearance. One of my least favorite episodes of my second favorite Trek show. Yeah, Charlie X was Yeoman Rand's first episode according to air date, which is usually what I go by. I usually prefer air date to production order, and that's what we go by in the Ensign's log as well. The events of our characters' lives in the Ensign's log occur according to the original episode's air date, not according to the production order or the star dates or anything like that. Not that the star dates made that much sense in the original series anyway. But I was going by production order, actually, in the video when I referred to Corbomite Maneuver as Yeoman Rand's first appearance, because Corbomite Maneuver, I believe, was the first episode of classic Trek to be produced after the second pilot. And it shows, like, you can tell Corbomite Maneuver, the tone, the look, the camera angles, the performances even of the actors, everything's just a little different. It's a little stiffer, it's a little more serious. Scenes have slightly different sort of tones to them than would become typical for Star Trek, the original series, very quickly in the first season. And for that reason, I've always really liked Corbomite Maneuver. But yeah, when I said that was Yeoman Rand's first episode, I was going by production order, not by air date. According to air date, yes, Charlie X is her first appearance. And actually, even though, yeah, Yeoman Rand is treated very poorly in that episode, I actually really like Charlie X. I think it's a pretty good episode. Next comment is from He Who Wears Pants. I also had a sort of general underlying resentment of Keiko Nags O'Brien myself until I joined the Army as a married man and dragged my wife to my first duty station. The town nearby, like most towns near Army bases, was rather remote and provincial, and my wife, who is more educated than I am, was afforded 0 relevant career opportunities. The next time I rewatched DS9, I finally got it. Keiko is the quintessential overqualified military spouse. I'm just surprised Miles never got any Dear John letters after she was effectively written off. Yeah, and I love that comparison that, yeah, Keiko is the overqualified military wife who gets dragged from post to post with her husband. That's a great way to put it. That's a great comparison. And actually, you say it's surprising Miles never got any Dear John letters. As much as I agree with people and share the sentiment that Keiko was not always very well served by the writers, I do at least give the writers of Deep Space Nine credit to the point that they didn't permanently write her off. I joked in this video that this comment was left on, that the writers sometimes seemed to be showing a lot more creativity and coming up with excuses why Keiko wasn't there than they ever did actually developing her character or giving her interesting things to do on the show. But at least they kept her around. At least they did not take the easy way out and say, oh, we're having trouble writing for this character, let's just kill her off, or have her and Miles get a divorce or whatever. They never did that. And I appreciate that. And I give them credit at least for that. They kept trying with Keiko, and they kept her around. They kept her on the show. They didn't just get rid of her, because I think to get rid of her permanently would have not only been unfair to her character, it would have also greatly diminished Chief O'Brien's character. So I think it was a very good move that they did not do that, even though I assume because they seemed to have such difficulty with her and were always finding reasons to have her not be around, that thought must have crossed their minds at some point during the production of the series. Here's a comment from Jason Nickerson. I personally think that Ensign Sito Jaxa from TNG had so much more story. I always thought she would turn up alive somehow, if not on Next Gen, but DS9. She would have been a great addition to the station, with Captain Sisko being aware of her past, or even being rescued by the DS9 crew. As dark as DS9 was, I think that a tortured and broken Sito Jaxa rebuilding herself would have been a perfect fit for the tone of the show. Yeah, you're right. I think she would have fit in well with DS9 given her character history, but I think having her survive the events of Lower Decks would have really gutted that story. And I think killing her off in that episode, at the end of that episode, was the right move. I don't think I could agree with you that she is a wasted character. If anything, she was a character that got a little bit of a second life, because she was one of the cadets who were court-martialed in the First Duty with Wesley and Proto Tom Paris, Nick Locarno. And the fact that we got to see her again at all is a very rare instance of TNG doing that kind of a reach back and pulling a character, back from a past episode. TNG very rarely ever did that, especially for a supporting character, practically a background character like Sito had been. So I don't think you could, at least again, as was the case with the comment about Barclay, even though you could certainly make an argument that the character could have gone other places and you could have told other stories with her, I think the way she was used, and especially the impact that her death had in that episode and provided such a perfect ending point for that Lower Decks episode, I don't think I would say that she was a wasted character. But again, it's all subjective. It depends on where you choose to draw the line. For me, I thought she was a very well-used character in her 2 appearances, and I would not say she was wasted. But again, obviously, you're free to disagree. And the argument that you make in favor of having her stick around and maybe become a character in Deep Space Nine is not a bad one. Here's another comment from that overlooked characters video from Harry Pothead. Chief O'Brien is the only person with a significant other in Deep Space Nine or The Next Generation. The only other character I know with a home life in the entire canon is Tuvok. He has a wife. I just think the people writing the show had no idea how important family was to people. The biggest problem with Wesley Crusher was they didn't give him a fucking friend. Jake Sisko would have been another Wesley Crusher if he didn't have Aaron Eisenberg as Nog to bounce off of. A solo kid always sucks. That's a good point about if maybe if they had given Wesley a recurring character to be friends with that was maybe closer to his age, that would have helped that character a lot. That's actually a really, really savvy observation. But Chief O'Brien is not the only character in Star Trek, or indeed even on Deep Space Nine with a home life. We're forgetting Captain Sisko, who eventually marries and lives with Cassidy Yates. Now, his marriage to Cassidy perhaps could have been a larger part of his character, a more important part of his character as dramatized in the show, but Captain Sisko does become a present-day husband in the show, not just a widower, but a present-day husband who is actually married to someone in Deep Space Nine. And I've often said that that's one of the things that makes Ben Sisko my favorite character in the whole Star Trek franchise is that he is the complete person. He's really the only complete person in the canon, because we see him as parent, as child, as husband, and also as widower, as a boss and as a friend, as a skeptic and as a religious, almost messianic figure. We see him in all of these different ways, through all of these different lenses, far more than we see any other character in the Star Trek canon. So I would say, yeah, I mean, you're right that they don't generally write main characters with families. That's a valid point. It's very rare. And O'Brien and Tuvok are two of the relatively few examples of main characters that are even said to have spouses or children. But O'Brien's not the only one. Don't forget about Captain Sisko. Here's one from Opinions No One Cares About. Steve just had a thought. What if Picard gets back to Earth at some point during Season 2 and Number 1 acts differently around him because he's a synth now? I hope that there is a scene in Season 2 where Picard is reunited with Number 1, but I don't think there's any chance that that scene plays out the way you have proposed in your comment, Opinions No One Cares About. I think what would happen, and what I hope happens, what I expect will happen, is Picard will return to Chateau Picard for the first time since his consciousness was moved into the synth body, and Number 1 will greet him as though he is exactly the same person. You know, or maybe there will be like a moment of hesitation, and then he will accept him and lick his hand and jump up on him or whatever. And because that will be the show's way of telling us, just in case there's anybody in the audience that still isn't sure, is it still Picard, is it not? That will be our way, that will be their way of saying it's definitely still Picard. It's the same guy. His dog knows him and he's still the same guy. So that's how that scene's going to go. Mark my words. If there is a reunion scene between Picard and his dog in Season 2, that's exactly what's going to happen. Now, these next few comments are from a video I made a while back about why conservatives actually like Star Trek. And the first one is from Shane's World, who writes, "Get woke, go broke. How's Picard and Discovery working out for you, Bernie bros? We have at least 20 more years before we are the next Venezuela. Let's all get AOC to captain our starship." I mean, I feel like you're being sarcastic there at the end, but if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decides to run for president when she's old enough to be constitutionally eligible, I'd probably vote for her. I think it would be great to have AOC as the captain of our ship, so to speak. As for the other shit, the go woke, get woke, go broke, is there any empirical evidence that that is a trend? Almost every movie or TV show they've ever said that about has turned out to be a hit, right? They said that about Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman made more money than any other DCEU movie at that point. They said that about Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was a big hit. It was a critical and a commercial success. They said that about the new Star Wars movies. The new Star Wars movies have made more money than fucking God. No matter what you may think of them creatively, they sure as hell have not gone broke, right? The new Star Trek shows. CBS seems to believe in the new wave of Star Trek enough that they have greenlit more Star Trek projects than at any other time in the franchise's history. I mean, there's Discovery and Picard currently in production. There's another live-action series in pre-production with the Giorgio show, the Section 31 show. There are rumors of at least 2 more live-action series in the pipeline that are being produced, plus the animated stuff, plus there's another live-action movie that is in development at some stage. So if it's get woke, go broke, and you're saying that the new generation of Star Trek is woke Trek, where's the going broke? This next one is from Rick McCombs. What happened? Did YouTube tell you that you had too many viewers, so you are chasing some of us away? No, Rick. The only thing I've heard from YouTube recently is when they sent me an email telling me that they were about to send me a plaque for how many subscribers I have. So. Next comment, also from the Why Do Conservatives Actually Like Star Trek video, is from Peter O. I figure they didn't notice the preachiness in TOS because they were kids when it was on the air. I figure you're probably right in many cases, Peter. I think that's largely the case with some of these folks who don't seem to notice that Star Trek has always been political, because when they first watched it, maybe they were just kids and they didn't pick up on the political subtext, or in some examples, text, that any adult with any sort of attention span and just basic capacity for comprehension should pick up on right away. But of course, we know that is not the case with all adults. For example, the guy who left the next comment, whose name is James Wright, who says, I am very conservative and I love Star Trek. I don't understand why we are politicizing Star Trek. Maybe James was a kid when he first watched it. Maybe that's James's excuse. Maybe he was a kid and then he sees the new stuff, which weirdly enough is less overtly political than the older stuff, but whatever. There's black people in it, so it's more political. There's women in it in prominent roles, so it's automatically more political and more preachy than old Star Trek, I guess. I'm just guessing that's where James or people who have a similar reaction are coming from. They see women and people of color on the screen like having dialogue and playing characters that have important roles to play in the story instead of just being tokens. And they're like, God, it's so political. Because they're jerks. Because they're just fucking jerks. And that's the assumption that they make. Oh, how dare they shove politics in my face by having black people in the show and giving them lines and things to do, so I have to pay attention to them. So I have to pay attention to what the women are saying, or else I won't know what the story's about. God, it's so political. I hate it. That's probably it. He was a kid. That's probably it. Speaking of the more recent incarnations of Star Trek, specifically Star Trek Picard, the next few comments are from my video reviewing the completed first season of Star Trek Picard. The first one is from Stanley Scalf, who says, Space orchids are, quote, the most Star Trek thing ever. He said this. He really said this. Yeah, Stanley, I did say that the space orchids are the most Star Trek thing ever. And maybe you're hung up on the most Star Trek thing ever because you feel like that's an overstatement. So let me just introduce you to the concept of hyperbole, because that's when you intentionally overstate something in order to emphasize your intended point. So do I really think that the space orchids in Picard are the most Star Trek thing ever? No, whatever that phrase would even mean, literally. I was saying that and overstating my opinion in order to make the point that the space orchids are completely in keeping with Star Trek's long established elements of absurdity and strangeness, which go back all the way to the earliest days of the franchise on TV. But after I read your comment, I started to question that, and upon further consideration, yeah, maybe space orchids don't belong in Star Trek. Maybe they're not the most Star Trek thing ever. Maybe they just don't fit in with a franchise that has also included our heroes encountering a giant floating Abraham Lincoln in space, or being transported to a planet where there's an obviously phony Old West town and being forced to reenact the gunfight at the OK Corral, or traveling back in time to rescue some humpback whales and bring forward to the future because there's a space probe that only speaks whale, or being magically transported to Sherwood Forest by an omnipotent, godlike being who pesters them from time to time, and being forced to act out the events of the classic Robin Hood tale, or the heroes encountering aliens that appear to them as fairy tale monsters, or as long dead baseball players, or the heroes visiting a planet where, oh shit, look who's here, Amelia Earhart. What a coincidence, right? Or, I don't know, a franchise where the ship encounters a giant space amoeba, or a franchise where one of the most iconic images from one of the most beloved episodes ever is of the captain of the ship buried up to his waist in a heap of rapidly replicating fur balls. Yeah, you're right. Space orchids have no place in a franchise so serious and sober and free of silliness as Star Trek. You're totally right. What were they thinking? Making a Star Trek show with something as off the wall as giant space orchids. It just doesn't fit with the rest of the franchise, does it? Here's one from Osiris Malkovich. Didn't Jurati straight up murder Bruce Maddox and everyone on the crew was just fine with it? Shouldn't she at least face a trial or something for that? It seems like they just skipped right over the whole murdered an innocent man in sickbay thing. Well, I think it's even stranger than that. They didn't skip over it. There was a scene where they talked about it, and it was decided that she would turn herself in at a starbase when they reached a starbase. And then they kind of got distracted by plot stuff, and they never came back to it. And then at the end, unless she was kissing Rios goodbye on the bridge of the ship in that final shot of everybody together on La Sirena, it seemed like they had sort of decided, nah, never mind. Like, I don't know, maybe the explanation is the combination of her acting under the delusion that was given to her from Commodore O's mind meld. Not necessarily a delusion, but just sort of the false impression that she was given that Maddox had to die in order to prevent this terrible catastrophe. A combination of that and the fact that Jurati had helped everybody to save the day at the end. Maybe those two things together convinced the rest of the crew to say, oh, it's fine. We're not going to turn her in for it. Maybe that's the explanation, but yeah, it was never explicitly explained on camera. There was never a scene where Picard said, we've all had a little conference and we've decided that we're not going to turn you in for murdering Dr. Maddox. We're going to give you a mulligan on that one. You were such a big help to us on the android planet. We really couldn't have done it without you. And we're just going to let you get away with this one. Don't murder anybody else, but go ahead, run along. No more murder, and we're cool. We'll call it even. Right? I guess that's what we're meant to think happened. Here's a comment from James Mills. I find it incredible that anyone who enjoyed any of the preceding 50 years of Star Trek could rate this show anything above 1 out of 10. It really was a complete farce from start to finish. The only accomplishment the creators can claim is having somehow made a worse incarnation of Star Trek than Discovery. Truly awful in every single respect. I felt sad and embarrassed watching the beloved old characters put their names and reputations behind this tripe. Fuck the lot of you who continue to defend it, including you, Steve Shives. You're very much part of the problem, not the solution. Until that last line, I was getting ready to say, well, it's all subjective and you're entitled to your opinion, and clearly you didn't like the show, and that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. I have a very different view of the show than you have, but that's the nice thing about subjective opinions, is nobody's right or wrong. You didn't like it. I liked it for the most part, or at least liked it more than I disliked it. And, we can agree to disagree, but then you had to go and say, fuck everybody who made it, and fuck everybody who defended it, and fuck me. Oh, so fuck you too, buddy. What did I do? Just because I like the show? It's not part of some nefarious plot to get them to keep making shitty Star Trek. I'm not in the tank for it. They're not paying me to say nice things about the show. By the way, they don't have to, because I genuinely like the show. The opinions that I share on these videos, when I'm myself and I'm not playing a character or something, when I'm myself on these videos and I tell you that I like something, that's because that's genuinely my opinion. Not because I have some agenda or somebody's telling me to say something or some hidden motive like that. I like the show. I genuinely like the show. The parts about it that I said I didn't like or I didn't think worked in my review videos, I meant all that. When I said there were parts of it that I really did like, and that overall, despite its flaws, I think it's a good show and I'm looking forward to future seasons of it, I mean that too. So if me liking a show you don't like makes me part of the problem, I guess I'm part of the problem, but I can't really say I give a shit about someone like you, who frankly seems like a bit of an asshole from your comment. I can't really say that I give a shit about someone like you thinking of me as a problem. Because I don't really give a fuck what you think about anything. After that, why should I? Why should I give a fuck what you think about anything? If you're not just going to express your opinion that you didn't like a show, which is fine, but you have to take it the extra step and say, and fuck you for liking it. Well, fuck you for being a dick. Here's one from Paul T. Sjordal. You know what I think Star Trek Picard missed? Why weren't holographic beings part of the discussion about synthetics? Why were the holographic beings on La Sirena allowed after the ban on synthetics? Why weren't they part of the discussion about the plight of synthetics under the ban? Why didn't we get to hear their opinion about the children of Data wanting to wipe out all biological life? Wouldn't their opinion on that have mattered to the other synthetics? Yeah, maybe. And there are a couple reasons why they might have not explored that in the season. I think the most likely explanation is that they only had 10 episodes and they felt bringing holograms into it along with androids would have just made everything seem too cluttered. And I can see that point of view. You know, if they want to focus on not just androids, but remember, Picard wasn't just about androids as we've seen them in Star Trek before, but a new kind of android, a biological android that is virtually indistinguishable from a naturally born biological entity. You know, that was what was so special about Dodge and Soji, and presumably about Picard's synth body at the end. That yes, they are androids technically, but they are so realistic and so detailed that they appear to be biological beings. So they're already introducing that new concept. And if you're going to throw on top of that, oh yeah, and let's not forget about holographic beings as well, that might start to feel a little cluttered. It might start to feel a little busy. And there was a lot of stuff going on in the series already that they didn't necessarily have time to fully explore. So throwing in, oh yeah, and don't forget holograms, that would have been piling on, and that would have been way too much. So if that was their reason, I can see that. Also, don't forget that Voyager established that that's a blind spot for the Federation and for Starfleet. And maybe they still have that blind spot. You know, the notion that, well, a holographic being could attain sentience and be a person entitled to legal rights just the same as an android could, that is a leap that Starfleet has not yet made. Even though obviously they should, because the shows, especially Voyager with the Doctor, have established that holographic people can be people deserving of rights, and that is a leap that Starfleet and the Federation should make, and they should grant legal recognition to people like the Doctor who are holographic but are still sentient. And they just haven't done that yet. And I actually kind of like that because it reinforces that's how our society is. We have blind spots too. We don't follow everything to its logical conclusion right away. When black people achieved, legally speaking, more or less equal rights in the 60s in the United States, that we didn't immediately say, oh, and you know what, since we've given, since we've eliminated discrimination and inequality on the basis of race, we need to go ahead and do that on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity and all these other facets too. Like, that didn't happen. That's not the way it works. We still have blind spots. We still have a road we need to travel in order to correct inequalities and injustices. And it's true for us, and it's true for Starfleet and the Society of the Federation as well. So that's another reason, maybe, why the question of holographic people was not really addressed in Picard, because that's a blind spot that Starfleet and the Federation still have. They didn't include them in the synth ban because they don't see holographic life forms as people. Here's one from Patrick Dodds. All I want to see is a new Star Trek series that's intelligent, optimistic about the future, where we have intelligent, benevolent explorers who peaceably explore the galaxy and help other life forms and learn about the universe and themselves. It could have humanistic morality plays, witty banter, action, comedy, quiet episodes, inspirational dialogue, and themes and stories that make you think and care. The characters could act like they were from the future rather than our time. They wouldn't take any cues from Firefly or Babylon 5. It would be a show you could watch with your family. But who am I kidding? Well, the thing about that, Patrick, is I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that. But that's the last 50 years of Star Trek. And I don't begrudge the creators of the current generation of wanting to try something different. Would I love it if there was a new Star Trek show that was maybe more episodic, that wasn't as dark, that that maybe people with kids could watch with their kids. Yeah, look, I don't have kids. I don't give a shit. But I have friends who have young kids who are big Star Trek fans who are a little sad that they don't feel comfortable watching Discovery or watching Picard with their kids because it's not appropriate for kids. So, I mean, I sympathize with them and I feel for them, even though it's not my situation, and it doesn't bother me at all. Like, it does not bother me at all. But I sympathize with other fans who it is a problem for. So I do hope that eventually there are some more new shows that fit the criteria that you're laying out. And I recognize that the new shows are a departure in that way from previous iterations of the franchise. But again, it doesn't bother me because I feel like they have the right to try something different. And I think the characters, you know, acting the way we act today, like that's just a way of enabling the writers to comment on our present society, which is something that Star Trek has always tried to do and has always done, and it's always been a very important part of Star Trek. And I think just because they have introduced elements of their shows that have shown us that maybe the utopian future of the Federation isn't quite as perfect as we might have thought it was before, that doesn't mean that the optimistic future is dead. It's still there. There are still people who live out those values and who are willing to fight for those ideals and fight to protect that society from collapsing due to people who don't quite live up to those ideals. So that in and of itself is an optimistic message that yes, the future can be better than the present, and if that optimistic future is ever threatened, there will always be people who will fight to preserve it. That is an optimistic message in and of itself. And that message is present in Discovery and Picard. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that as well. And these last few comments are from my video that I made about the bittersweet melancholy of Star Trek Picard. This one is from Beta Artemis. You reminded me of something that I love and appreciate this show for doing, for allowing characters to age and progress and move to different places in their lives. As much as I love TNG, there was always a part of me frustrated that the characters seemed to be frozen in place and never really grow except physically. The fact that the Picard series resolved this issue and made a point of allowing characters to be different yet retain some of who they were still is much appreciated. Picard, Riker, Troy, Hugh, and Seven are all at different stages of their lives than who we last saw them. And they didn't just get older, but they also aged and changed emotionally and mentally. It kind of amuses me that in some ways Picard manages to give more development for these characters in 10 episodes than perhaps all those years of TNG managed to. I agree with you completely, and of course the reason why the characters received so much more development in their relatively brief appearances in Season 1 of Picard than they did in their old shows is because the writers of Picard wanted that. They wanted to evolve and develop and change the characters and allow us to meet them at different points in their lives than they were when we last saw them. That was all very intentional. Just as keeping them largely static in their older incarnations was intentional. You know, I've talked many times about how one of my major problems with Voyager was how static all the characters were. But of course, that was part of TNG as well. The characters of TNG were largely very static. I think TNG got away with it a lot more than Voyager did because the characters in TNG, despite being static, were very clearly drawn. Like, we knew who they were and we could describe them and sort of latch onto them and care about them. And yes, they were static, but they were also fairly consistent, whereas Voyager pulled off the very, very impressive trick of bad writing of having characters that felt both static and also inconsistently written. And were also just kind of vague, like you never really knew who most of them were. And in some cases, like with Chakotay, it was really egregious. It's like even after 7 seasons, it's like, who the hell is this guy? I don't even know who this guy is. And I've been watching him for, hundreds of hours, and I have no idea who he is. TNG, at least everybody was very clearly drawn. But I think that was one of the great missed opportunities of the TNG movies, is that they did not progress people. The TNG movies were even worse in their way than the TV show, because there was no reason for it. If you're doing a 2-hour movie every couple of years, there's no reason to keep everybody frozen like that in their same ranks, in their same jobs, in their same point in their lives. Nothing ever changed for the crew of the Enterprise E in those TNG movies, ever. Nobody, except for the very, very last movie when they kill off Data at the end, and when they get Riker and Troy married to each other. And then, again, at the very end of the movie, we finally see Riker and Troy leaving the Enterprise. That's it. Just a little bit of long overdue and fairly obvious character development at the very end of the last movie. So that was a huge, huge missed opportunity for the TNG movies. And I'm very glad that Star Trek Picard corrected that and found such interesting and creative places to move those characters to. Here's one from Paul Bloomer. I think I just fell in love a bit with Steve at the end of this video. Something about how he signs off. Oh, Paul. Don't fall in love with me. I'll only break your heart. And finally, here's one from Hibaru-san. We were all dead at the start of TNG anyway, seeing as how it's set in the future. This is, I swear to you, this is one of my favorite comments I've ever gotten. And now, I mean, it's just such a bleak thought. It's like, I really wish that somebody would do a Star Trek parody series, or like some kind of satire or spoof of Star Trek style shows, and the opening title is "This takes place in the 24th century, you're all dead, so you shouldn't care about any of this anyway." Like, there's just something about that thought of like, well, I mean, yeah, okay, it's nice, it's a fun story, it's like 300 years from now, I'm dead, why do I care? It's just, there's something about that thought, and that thought even occurred to you, that I find absolutely delightful. So thank you for sharing that. So that's it. That's all the comments that I'm going to respond to. That's all the droning on you are going to have to endure from me. I want to remind you, as I always do, about my Patreon page, patreon.com/Steve Shives. If you want to support me in this work that I do, help me continue to make these videos, the Star Trek videos and the other videos that I make as well. And also, if you become a patron at any level, $1 a month or more, you can vote in the polls to choose future topics of regulation scripted Trek Actually videos, the ones where I really try very hard to make them good, even though apparently it doesn't make a difference. And in addition to the Patreon page, don't forget the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I co-host with the great Jason Harding, also known as the funny one who does most of the work. You can listen to the Ensign's Log at the links provided in the description of the video. You can listen on the website or on SoundCloud, or subscribe via RSS using whatever your favorite podcast app is. If you like my Star Trek stuff here on YouTube, I think you'll really, really dig the Ensign's Log, so check it out. I will be back in a couple of weeks for another regulation Trek Actually video about the question of whether or not Starfleet is actually the bad guy in Star Trek, which is relevant to some of the discussions we've had about Star Trek Picard and its somewhat darker view of the future and of the Federation and Starfleet as a more flawed organization. So that should be a fun video to do, and hopefully will be a fun video to watch. And that's it. I'll see you next time, folks. Please take care of each other and take it easy. See you next time.